Senator Lankford to inquire.
Thank you very much. I apologize. I was literally running back and forth on the floor. We're dealing with pharmacy benefit manager stuff. That's some of next week as well. So I appreciate y'all's engagement and the help on this. I need help and clarification on this, and it deals with the kidney side of the transplants. About 1% of our federal budget goes towards this issue. I mean, it's an enormous amount of money. There seems to be challenges here in multiple areas, both of getting kidneys to people in the process of actually doing the transplant, other treatments for all the kidney diseases and the whole multitude of those things out there, especially for diabetics and others. There's a lot of challenges that are here. Help unpack this for me, and what am I missing on this, and what can be done?
I think Dr. Lynch can weigh in on a little bit on the transplant center side, but a lot of the incentives just don't line up. So from the OPO side, it has a lot to do with, I mean, what are you going after, what cases, how are you pursuing these cases, and are building your organizations in a way that you can ask these families for the gift of donation and then manage these patients and getting the kidneys, getting the patient to surgery to remove kidneys for transplantation. I think the way things have changed in terms of financial incentives and things like that, and then I think transplant centers are incentivized differently, and I think they have their own challenges. So you have the OPO trying to push for increased kidney transplantation, and I think, and correct me, but transplant centers are more rewarded a little bit for being more conservative. We're lucky in Ohio that we have one of the best transplant programs in terms of wait lists and things in the country. So, but maybe Dr. Lynch can weigh in on this a little bit.
So yeah, I'm trying to find the incentives here and where we are. So Dr. Lynch, go ahead.
So renal failure is a crisis in America as a result of the epidemic of diabetes and organ failure. The difference in the incentives is that the OPO is incentivized, or ideally will be incentivized, to recover as many donors as possible. The center is incentivized to do as many transplants as possible, but is also measured on both its pre-transplant and post-transplant mortality. We need to make sure that there's a continuous chain of custody in these incentives so that they really do align, and so that we take the best care of the donor patients, we get every potentially usable organ recovered, and then get it to the recipient who can make the best use of that. And we make sure that centers are incentivized to take, what in some measures would be considered a risk, both with a riskier patient and a riskier organ, to give them that chance at longer, better life.
So tell me what that would mean as far as the incentive shift there. What would that look like? I understand what you're saying. Practically, what would that look like?
So ideally with better contractors as a result of this legislation, we would have a contractor that would measure everything in transplant, looking at our pre-transplant listing policies and looking at our pre-donor evaluation policies of who the OPOs are seeing as donor patients. And what we would do is make sure that every organ that is recovered is expedited to the best possible recipient for it, and that centers are able to remain competitive so that they're not routinely being pushed down the list or preempted in order to retain access for their patients.
So at this point, you're assuming, or maybe rightfully so, that there are some individuals that there may be a kidney available for them, but because they're considered a higher risk, they're kind of set aside.
Yes, sir. So for example, if we hypothetically were to measure centers only on their pre-transplant mortality or their post-transplant mortality, it will make centers conservative, and they will not list people who are at a higher risk of not making it to transplant, so dying before, or of not surviving as long after. But they deserve that chance if they're medically able to get both those options.
Mr. McCarthy, you're nodding your head over here.
This is an area that PAC has really stepped forward in as well, in terms of allowing patients an opportunity to have a voice, to be included in those decisions. There are some patients who are more willing to take a more at-risk organ in exchange for not waiting so long. So definitely something patients would advocate for.
Okay. Y'all, thank you. Anyone else make a comment? Yes.
I would just say that there are two ways to, I think what you're really asking is to reduce the costs of the ESRD program. And so I think there are really two ways that the work that we're doing here today do that. If you have fewer people who need, who run into renal failure, you really have to focus on, and I know CBO has a hard time scoring prevention. And so we have to find a way to be able to, I know we've been discussing, TROA and other things to reduce obesity, reducing diabetes. Most patients are not controlled for their hypertension, particularly Black and brown patients. At the Global Liver Institute, we have more advocates coming from Oklahoma telling us of the issues in Native communities of being able to deal with these issues that drive their need for transplantation. To the point of incentives, the incentives are to keep people on dialysis, not to transplant.
Right.
And so the ESRD program would be relieved if we had, on both ends, people being swiftly moved to transplant instead of languishing on dialysis and preventing the drivers of renal failure in the first place.
Okay, that's extremely helpful to be able to walk through, because we do have to fix the incentives in the process that are pushing people towards dialysis long term, rather than trying to give them the opportunity to have a much higher quality of life. Thank you.
Senator Warren?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.